cap and what it would entail?
So we actually were launched in early 2021, but the act that actually made us real was only brought into place in late summer. Okay. Having said that, we operated as we have been in operation since early 2021. The first time that we started thinking about the concept of cap and successively stringent targets is when we received the letter from both ministers. That's what kicked off this work.
Thank you. That's excellent to know, because I have that letter here. So that letter is November 1st. Right. Minister Guilbeault and Minister Wilkinson formally asked you to consider an emissions cap. That's the same day the Prime Minister stood up and told the world that he had an emissions cap. I find that kind of extraordinary. I mean, I hate that expression about writing things on the back of a napkin, but couldn't the minister have at least called you from the airport before he went? I mean, the Prime Minister stands on the world stage and says there's an emissions cap plan, and they have never bothered to ask you to look into it. Don't you think that raises questions about our credibility?
Bluntly, no. I think when you take a look at our terms of reference says we are to advise the government on numerical targets.
Okay, sorry, I'm reading it says that they're asking you to, quote, prioritize early and deep reduction. So this is as serious as it gets. So you're mandated to prioritize early and deep reductions at a time when the Prime Minister standing on the world stage saying he's got an emissions cap, he hasn't talked to anybody about it. And at the same time, we have Canada's energy regulator that's promoting an increase of 1.2 million barrels a day coming out of the oil sands. How do you square that you're going to be pushing for deep reductions while the government you're working for is promoting massive increases in the oil sector?
So I would say the sequence of operations that went like this, and I'll start by qualifying.
I need to say, I don't want to be rude. I don't have much time. I'm not interested in the sequence. I'm interested in this policy conflict. How do you push for these early and deep reductions while the government you're working for is telling the world that they're going to be looking to at least a massive increase of over 1 million barrels a day? What do you say to that?
First of all, it's not our job to decide whether or not Canada is going to have a cap or not. That's the government's job. They did that. Now they're asking our advice to help put the cap in place. That's completely consistent with the Act and our terms of reference.
Okay, but your Act says, it tells you also, because you switch saying publicly, do not allow for increases in GHG emissions. Don't you call the minister and say, what the heck are you guys doing promoting a 1.1 million barrel a day increase? That is contradictory to your mandate, is it not?
Well, look, I would say the Canadian Energy Regulator is a Crown corporation. I mean, it's actually not the government. They have their own independent board. They have their own independent management. Yep. I do know that the minister, you have to talk to the government, but I do know the minister has messaged to them quite strongly that they wanted to, the minister wanted the Canadian Energy Regulator to align its operations and its philosophy to a net zero 2050 outcome. Okay. And I know that is happening as we speak.
Okay, well, that's good to know, because you said to my colleague that you weren't looking at whether new projects would be even under the cap, but the International Energy Agency, I mean, hardly a hotbed of radicalism, is saying there should be no new oil and gas if we're going to meet our targets. So is that something in line with you? If you say your mandate is to not allow for increases in greenhouse gas emissions, how is it that you don't look at the new projects coming on? At least be under the cap, or what the IEA is saying, whether they should be allowed at all.
Yeah, again, I think that's a degree of resolution that is not aligned with our mandate, but the government's going to have to struggle with that. If there's a cap, what is it, and what are the implications for existing or new projects underneath the cap? That's the government's responsibility. We are interpreting our terms of reference and our task as providing guidance on a higher strategic level and leaving those types of decisions to the government.
I'm looking at this thing here that's really reassuring Canadians that you guys are going to be prioritizing early and deep reductions, and I'm trying to figure out where these early and deep reductions are happening, because I want to go to the other principle that this Liberal government's working on, and you seem to support that the emissions that are coming from our offshore sales of oil and gas is more than all the emissions made in all the sectors of Canada combined. When we add the TMX pipeline, which is designed for export, 900,000 more barrels will be exported. But you don't think that has to be considered if we're going to look at actually saving the planet, that's somebody else's problem?
So I need to be clear on this. We don't have an opinion on that because
you don't have an opinion on that
because it's outside of the purview of the act that makes us real. It's
I know,
not in
but
our terms of
like,
reference. That's right.
you know, this would be a great discussion in 2006. But what the IPC is saying, the planet is burning. So we have a government that is going to massively increase export to places like China or India, where it'll be burned. Your job is to warn the government to prioritize early and deep reductions and make sure we don't have greenhouse gas emissions. They are exporting upwards of 1 million barrels overseas so it can be burned there. Don't you think you have at least the moral obligation to warn the government to say, come on, guys, you can't pull this kind of stuff and meet our obligations on the international stage?
We're out of time on this round, and sorry, I'm just going to have to cut it off there. If Mr. Angus wants to come back to that, we should get back to him one more time. But right now we're going to move into our second round, slightly shorter, and Mr. Melillo is first up with 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I'd like to go back to Mr. Wicklum and actually pick up on a question asked by my Liberal colleague, Mr. Brusen, and perhaps I misinterpreted your answer, and correct me if I am wrong, but I'd just like to get a bit of clarity there in talking about how we measure